Thank you
for the invitation. So we are recording your talk today about Srila Madhvacarya. So your background seems to be from Madhvacarya's mutt. Is that the Udupi mutt?
Yeah, I thought it would be apropos to the occasion.
Yes, very good, very good. So let me have a brief introduction about Mukunda Datta Prabhu. Mukunda Datta Prabhu is a very accomplished devotee, disciple of Srila Prabhupada, joined when he was very, very young, when teenagers are just experiencing the prime of their youth. He decided to join the Krishna consciousness movement, ISKCON, and he has done tremendous service for the benefit of ISKCON and the worldwide community of devotees. He's also a Sanskrit scholar, and he's also an editor for the Bhaktivedanta Book Trust, currently lives in Vrindavan. He has also worked very intimately with Gopi Paranadhana Prabhu, who he holds in very high esteem, and helped Gopi Paranadhana Prabhu complete publications of Rupa Goswami's Lagu Bhagavatamrita, Jiva Goswami's Bhagavat Sandarpa. So he grew up in Southern California. He became a vegetarian in early days and practiced yoga at 10 years old. While studying Sanskrit in a private high school, he received Bhagavad-Gita as it is and joined ISKCON in 1976 at the age of 15. He has traveled with the Radha Damodar Sankirtan party, the very famous party which really was very instrumental in spreading Krishna consciousness in the early days. And many devotees joined ISKCON through the Radha Damodar traveling Sankirtan party. He has also served as a Pujari and Gurukula teacher and returned to college in 1990, majoring in South Asian literature and languages. He's also a very expert Indian classical musician, and he's also a very famous Kirtaniya. I had the pleasure of residing in Dallas while he was living in Dallas. He had also lived in Houston, the Houston community. So he's very much acquainted with the Texas devotees and also in Austin. He has much to share and he's also done much work on the life of Srila Madhvacarya. Today, he will enlighten us and share with us the glories of Srila Madhvacarya, who is highly respected, a very great Acharya, who really preached very, very boldly against impersonalism. And his school of Vaishnavism is known as Suddha Dvaita, pure dualism. And through the great efforts of Madhvacharya and predecessor acharyas like Ramanujacharya, leading up to Sriman Mahaprabhu, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and his disciples, leading up to Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, Srila Prabhupada. Our lineage comes that way. So we owe much debt to Srila Madhvacharya. And so today we will hear about Srila Madhvacharya's great contribution to Vaishnavism. So without much ado, Mukunda Datta Prabhu, if you could please begin. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna.
Thank you very much, first for your kind invitation and also for your very generous introduction. I will begin by mentioning that probably the most information that we have about Madhvacarya from Srila Prabhupada is in Chaitanya Charitamrita, Majilita chapter 9. That chapter describes Lord Chaitanya's South Indian tour. And in particular, one passage of the chapter is describing Chaitanya Mahaprabhu when he came to Udupi. He met with the members of Madhvacarya's Sampradaya. They're called Tattvavadis. And he spoke Krishna consciousness with them. And there in particular in text number 245 in the purport, Srila Prabhupada elaborates on quite a few of Madhvacarya's biographical details, we can say, hagiographical details. I won't really delineate on that because everyone can look that up on their own, but I just wanted to mention that that's probably the one place where you'll find the most about Madhvacarya throughout Srila Prabhupada's books. Of course, Srila Prabhupada is quoting Madhvacarya and even his representatives like the Bhagavatam commentator Vijay Dwaj Tirtha and others throughout his books. So as he said already, the Madhvacarya is very, very prominent acharya. Whenever Vedanta is discussed, usually there are three schools that are focused on, and that's the Mayavad school, Shankaracharya, and Ramanuja's Vishishtadvaita, and Madhvacarya's Shuddhadvaita. These acharyas appeared in that order. Of the three, Shankaracharya was first, then Ramanujacharya, and finally Madhvacarya. Madhvacarya was not satisfied with the readings of either Shankar or Ramanuja. And although he was born in a family of Bhagavatas, he rejected the teachings of his own guru, Achyuta Preksha, and in fact defeated his own guru. His own guru eventually became his disciple. We'll hear some more about that, but in general, we can hardly find accurate information about saints. This is a worldwide phenomenon. In Hinduism also, for example, the Shankar Vijaya, the authorized biography of Shankaracharya, was written several hundred years after Shankaracharya's disappearance, and it's full of historical inaccuracies. We're very fortunate in our line because we have, like in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, we have essentially eyewitness accounts of Madhvacarya's life. Just as Chaitanya Charitamrita was written on the basis of notes taken by his direct disciple, Raghunath Das Goswami, and others. So similarly, the authorized hagiography of Madhvacarya is called Sumadhva Vijaya, written by Narayana Pandit Acharya. Narayana Pandit Acharya was grand disciple of Madhvacarya. And that book is practically the only information that we have about Madhvacarya, but it's quite comprehensive. So we have a lot of information about Madhvacarya. He was, Narayan Pandit Acharya was one of Madhva's leading disciples, not a grand disciple. So it's, his father was one of Madhva's leading disciples as well. And he was also, his uncle was the personal librarian of Madhvacarya, so he had an insider's view. So this book is very valuable, and most of what we know about Madhvacarya is coming from this book. Most of what we say tonight will be from this book. So Madhva is considered by his followers to be an incarnation of three personalities, three great devotees, Vayu, Hanuman, and Bhima. And we find in many of the characteristics and activities and miracles performed by Madhvacarya. They correspond to the abilities of those three personalities. So that's an introduction, we can say. Madhvacarya appeared in Pajaga Kshetra. Pajaga is a small village on top of His house was on top of a small hill, just outside of Udupi. Udupi is located in the southwestern part of India, in South Kannada district, just on the Arabian Sea. And even before Madhvacarya's birth, nearby Udupi was considered to be a holy place. Madhva's parents belonged to the Shivaldi Brahmana community. They were speakers of the Tulu language, local language there. And they were Bhagavatas. In those days, Bhagavatas were a kind of a Vaishnava sampradaya. They were worshiping Shiva and Vishnu together, as they didn't make any distinction between the two. So he came from that temple. And in Udupi, there were two famous temples, Ananteshwar temple and Chandramaleshwar temple. So his parents were going there from Pajaka Kshetra to worship. And Madhvacarya's father was named Madhyageha Bhakta. Madhyageha means the middle house. So we don't really know if that was his given name or not. Others say his name was Narayan. His mother's name was Vedavati, and she was from a local village there. So Madhyageha Bhakta, they had a hard time having any children. And so they were praying in the temples there that they could also have a son. Every pious householder requires a son. It's a part of one's dharma. Because a son is the one who performs Pitra Tarpana after one's death, Shraddha, so that one is released from any ghostly existence if one happens to die untimely, for example, or an unfortunate end of any sort. This is what tradition says. So they were frustrated in their desire to have a child. And one day, when they were at the temple, a crowd had gathered, and they saw that some person, divinely inspired person, had climbed to the top of the Dvajastambha. Every temple has a flagpole, you can say, out in front of the temple. So this person climbed up on top of that flagpole and was announcing to the entire village that a very great personality was about to take birth, and that he was an incarnation of Vayu, and he would appear to restore dharma. So somehow or other, Madhvacarya's father understood that this was his son. This was maybe in the 14th century. His Madhvacarya's dates are considered to be, he was born in 1238, and he lived until 1317, so 13th, 14th century. These dates have been suggested by scholars, although it's usual with anyone in South Asian history that it's very hard to nail down any specific dates. But these are fairly safe assessments because we find that this time period is corroborated in other literatures. So they named their son Vasudeva, and they would also visit the temple in Udupi. The boy was very special from the very start. Just after his birth, when they had taken him to the temple of Ananteshwar, Chandramaleshwar, they were returning home, and in those days it was a very thick forest, and it was at night also, so it was a very fearful journey. And it said that there was a ghost who attacked the party, but this ghost also recognized Vasudeva's very special position and didn't harm anyone. So although they were very shaken by that experience, they also consider themselves blessed to have that confirmation, if you will, of Madhva's divine status. So he grew up to be an extraordinarily strong and intelligent child. He was vigorous, he was healthy, he was very fond of sports. And as one scholar describes, he was full of great pluck. He used to perform many miracles. Srila Prabhupada mentions some of those in the Chaitanya Charitamrita purport that I've already mentioned. He began his studies early, at the early age of 5. In those days, it was unusual to begin study that early. But he amazed his mentors with his quick wit. His first teacher was named Totam Nilaya, and the Pandit thought that Madhva was not paying attention to his studies because he could see every time he turned around, Madhva was engaged in his sportive proclivities. You have to understand, as an incarnation of Hanuman, he's naturally going to have those propensities. So one day he confronted Madhva and said that, you're not paying attention to your lessons, you're paying more attention to sports. You really need to learn because you're a Brahmin from a respected family. This is your dharma. So Madhvacarya countered that, no, I've learned everything you're saying. And he amazed his teacher by reciting the entire Veda that the teacher had been teaching in those days. And he recited it not only forwards, but also backwards. And they divide Vedic mantras into various ways. And he did everything perfectly. So his teacher was amazed by that. He was invested with the sacred thread when he was only 5, although that's very unusual. So he was impressing his seniors in this way. Toward the end of his studies, he studied Aitareya Upanishad. And one day when his teacher was speaking, Madhvacarya disagreed with what his teacher had said. And the teacher was aghast, I can imagine, but Madhvacarya explained the Veda in a manner that was consistent with previous authorities and yet completely different from his teacher. In those days, the sway of Shankaracharya was nearly universal, especially in Southwest Asia, Southwest India like that. So in this way, he finished his studies. And around the same time, he decided that he wanted to become a sannyasi. He wanted to become a full-time monk, permanent. He was very young at this time, only around 10 or so. So naturally, his parents disagreed. And it was quite a struggle for Madhvacarya to actually effect that. He, in effect, ran away from home and joined the temple. His father eventually found him and tried to bring him back, but no matter what he did, Madhvacarya just refused to take part in worldly life at all. He insisted that he was going to stay in the temple and study from his guru. He did that. His guru's name was Achyuta Preksha. And Achyuta Preksha had previously had a premonition that Madhvacarya, he would have a very special disciple who would be a very special personality. And somehow Achyuta Preksha could sense that this disciple, Vasudeva, in those days he was named, was that personality. He had some, upon first seeing Madhvacarya, he had that sense very strongly. So Madhvacarya left home, he became a sannyasi, he was initiated, and he was given the title Ananda Tirtha. The name Madhva and the name Ananda Tirtha are synonymous. That's the tradition. So Madhva's father was so distraught about this that he threatened suicide if Madhva took sannyas at that time. And even then, Madhvacarya would not agree to return home. The Majjhigeha Bhatta then piteously asked Vasudeva, his son, who would take care of his old and helpless parents in their old age. Finally, Vasudeva relented, and he agreed that if you have another son, I will stay home until the time that that boy is born, then I'm taking sannyas. So in this way, they were all bound. So Vasudeva was given the name after initiation Purna Prajna. And he was at most 12 years old, very young age to take sannyas. So his guru had begun to teach him an Advaita treatise called Ishta Siddhi. And he had no more then explained the first verse when Purna Prajna questioned everything, whatever he had taught. And this was Madhvacarya's characteristic. And the Guru tried to convince Madhvacarya, but Madhvacarya was very firm. And his arguments were also very strong. And he impressed his Guru about this as well. He was very fond of Bhagavatam, and he used to listen to Bhagavatam regularly. In fact, later on, he wrote a commentary on the Bhagavatam, which we still use. He also wrote commentary on Mahabharata, and he mentions therein that many of the verses in the Mahabharata had been interpolated. They'd been added at later points. They weren't really Vyasa's original intention. The word tatparya, which we call purport, actually means the intention of the author. A self-realized commentator has to know the intention of the author. That's not an easy thing because you cannot get that just from the text alone. It requires some divine vision. So Madhvacarya had this vision. So naturally, the local pundits would take Madhva to task for his challenges of the established tradition, which in those days was Advaitavada, Shankaracharya's philosophy. And Madhvacarya would quote from any number of sources, shastras, including shastras that no one had ever heard about, in order to buttress his arguments. So when people asked him, how do you know about these shastras and where do you get this wisdom from? These are not things that your teachers taught you. Madhva simply replied that he had learned them all in a past life. So he gradually spoke to larger and larger audiences. He became well known for his brilliant but also controversial views. And he was undoubtedly charismatic and very influential. Achyuta Preksha was simultaneously proud of his disciple and simultaneously a little bit afraid of his disciple. So Madhvacarya was preaching like this and gave him the name, as we said, Anandatirtha. So now he's called Madhva. Madhva, for esoteric reasons, is considered to be synonymous with Anandatirtha. Anyway, Sumadhva Vijaya relates, his biography relates that some Buddhist scholars came to debate with Madhvacarya. First one was Vadi Singha, and the other one was Buddhisagara. And they came to Achyuta Preksha's mutt with the express purpose of trouncing Anandatirtha. In the beginning of the debate, Vadi Singha attacked Madhva's position from as many as 18 different angles. In those days, people were so learned that they could do that. And he did so in such a way as to leave little room for anyone to get out of his strong arguments. Nonetheless, Madhvacarya did so anyway and raised serious objections about Vadi Singha's presentation. And Vadi Singha was completely speechless. He couldn't say anything about it. So Buddhisagara spoke next, and Madhvacarya did the same thing with him. Both these scholars, they requested an overnight recess to assess everything that had been discussed and to resume the discussion the next day. But next day when they were supposed to return, they never did. And it was discovered that they'd actually fled town overnight. So this kind of thing was very common with Anandatirtha. Madhvacarya was really interested in attacking what he saw as the real enemy, and that is Advaita Vedanta, Shankaracharya's Mayavad philosophy. Mayavad means the philosophy, illusionism, the philosophy that everything is an illusion. This is what Shankara taught about this world. And Madhvacarya's philosophy, Dvaita philosophy, strictly dualistic philosophy, is called instead Tattvavada, because he wants to establish the truth of the situation, or the fact that this world is truth, real. So he was constantly on the attack of Shankaracharya's views, and which we can hardly imagine how radical this was, because Madhvacarya's own guru was an Advaitin as well. And virtually all of the scholars of that time were all followers of Shankaracharya. So Madhvacarya did not even use the arguments of his predecessor Ramanujacharya to defeat Shankaracharya. He had his own views, completely original views. So this was astonishing to many, and those who were very intelligent and learned would give Madhva a listen, and if they were sincere, in many cases, they would convert, they would become his disciples. This is a pattern that we see throughout Madhvacarya's life. But he was controversial, very controversial, because of being so radical. And many scholars of the day had challenged Madhva that if you're going to preach your own philosophy like this, because in Krishna consciousness, we're not allowed to preach our own philosophy. We're only allowed to preach what our predecessors teach. So they insisted that if you're going to preach your own teachings like this, then you have to write your own commentary on Brahma Sutra to do so. And Madhva agreed to do that. In the meanwhile, he continued preaching and traveling widely in South India. And it's said that he came across this very Prakanda Pandit, very staunch scholar named Vidyasagar of the Madhvacarya, of the Mayavad line. And he presented his arguments to him and countered him very strongly. He won great support and astonished admiration from the people in general and from his hosts, wherever he would give a program. He performed many miracles that only persons like Bhima could perform. One time, well, it said that his powers of digestion were superhuman. One time when he was a child, his sister was supposed to be babysitting. She went out for some time. Madhva was alone in the house. Madhva found a large urn full of horse gram, heavy dal, raw, and he was munching on that as a snack. And when his sister came back and found that this urn had been emptied out, raw dal Madhvacarya was eating, she was astonished and was afraid that the boy might die. So, but somehow or other, he was able to digest that. So on another occasion, it said that Madhvacarya, after he had a huge feast, his host had offered him 1,000 bananas with the idea that he would bless those bananas and they could distribute the prasadam to all the attendees. But instead, Madhvacarya ate all 1,000 of those bananas, and he also drank 40 pots of milk in addition to that. And this is after taking a full feast in this Yajamana's house. So Madhvacarya was preaching like this, and he was astonishing people by his charisma, by his learning, by these miracles that he was saying. So many ways he was doing like this. So eventually, Madhvacarya decided to go pay his respects to Vyas and get the blessings of Vyasdeva at Badrika Ashram, because even now Vyas is considered to be staying in his cave ashram near Badrika Ashram in the Himalayas. So Madhvacarya decided he was going to do that. If he could get the blessings of Vyasdeva for his commentary, then no one should be able to say anything. This is his idea. So taking his followers, he went with him. He visited the temple of Naranarayan, and then he continued on his own to visit Vyas, and he received approval from the deity of Naranarayan that your commentary is good. Madhvacarya had begun his commentary, Gitartham Vakshyami Shaktitaha, which means, as much as I'm able, I'm going to speak about the meaning of the Gita. This is his Bhagavad-Gita Commentary. So this voice in the temple instead told him, no, you should say, Gitartham Vakshyami Leshataha. I will only speak a little bit about the meaning of the Gita. The implication is that the deity appreciated that Madhvacarya's knowledge was so vast, even a little bit speaking of what he understood of the Bhagavad Gita was enough to express its gist. So this is Madhvacarya's position. So when he went to see Vyas alone after preparing himself through penances and prayer, deep prayer, he went further, left his disciples at base camp, you can say, and he went to Vyas's cave under treacherous conditions high in the Himalayas. And there he met with Vyas, and he stayed with Vyas for some time and received the latter's decree that he should write his Dvaita commentary. And so after return from Vyasa's ashram, Madhvacarya was greatly inspired and dictated his Brahma Sutra Bhashya to his disciple Satyatirtha. Copies were made immediately, and they were sent back to Udupi to be recorded there and to be presented to his guru Achyuta Preksha. The party then returned home by way of East India, Bihar, Bengal, like that. Madhvacarya made many followers. There are still some followers of Madhvacarya in those provinces. So he was no longer regarded as a rebellious youth. Now he had the support of Vyasadeva. He had written a respectable Brahma Sutta Bhashya, and many learned persons began to take shelter of him. When he was coming through the Godavari region in Andhra Pradesh, he defeated a famous scholar named Shobhana Bhatta. This scholar became his disciple and was renamed as Padmanabha Tirtha. Similarly, in Kalinga, Orissa, Madhva's arguments similarly convinced one Swami Shastri, an influential government minister and highly skilled orator, who eventually submitted to Madhva and was known henceforth as Narahari Tirtha, another one of the main pillars of the Madhvacharya line. So in this way, he was gaining respect and also gaining followers. Occasionally, Madhva, when he returned to Udupi, occasionally he used to take his followers and he would bathe in the sea there at Udupi. And one day he had gone there with the intention of composing a stotra in glorification of Lord Vishnu. So he took his bath and he was seated in meditation at a spot near Malpe on the coast near Udupi. And he was composing some stotras. He had composed maybe 5 of his stotras, of the 12 that he composed, Dwadasha stotras. And then he noticed that there was a ship off the coast that was in danger. It had been stuck on a sandbar. And so Madhvacharya took his upper cloth and he waved it, but with such force, gale force, that this boat was blown off the sandbar and saved from calamity. So the captain and the crew, they were so astonished at this, they anchored and they came ashore and they offered their obeisances at the feet of this miraculous sannyasi who was able to do that. It's not really that miraculous because we have to consider, again, Madhvacharya was considered to be the incarnation of Vayu. So Vayu is the wind god. He can certainly do anything he wants with the wind, including blow a boat that's a mile away off a sandbar just with a wave of his cloth. So that's what he did. So he composed stotras, and he was particularly thinking of Krishna, and he had some premonition that today the Lord will appear. So he was praying like that. And then when this captain's boat was saved, the captain at least offered Madhvacharya something to express his gratitude. He actually offered Madhva everything in the whole boat. But Madhva, being a sannyasi, didn't really need anything. So Madhvacharya did accept some big block of gopi chandan because devotees wear gopi chandan for their tilak. So his disciples, nobody could lift it. The crew could not lift it. His disciples together could not lift it. Madhva himself alone lifted this huge block of chandan, maybe 3-4 feet must have been, block of chandan, heavy. And he began to bring it back to Udupi. Now, along the way at a place called Varabendeshwar, which still exists, they stopped at a Balaram temple there, and Madhva put down this block of chandan, and when he did so, the block split open to reveal deity of Krishna, Balakrishna. This is the famous Udupi Sri Krishna deity, which is now installed in Madhva's mutt in Udupi. Madhvacarya was amazed to see this, and he spontaneously began to glorify Krishna in so many ways. We can see the change in lyricism and the change in the content and the ecstasy is quite clear from reading his Dwadasha stotras. After once the sixth stotra begins, we can see Madhvacarya's great glorification of the Lord. So they came back to Udupi, they washed the deity in the Madhva Sarovar, the tank, the picture of which you see behind me, I hope, in Madhva's Sri Krishna Mutt. They washed the deity there, and then the deity was installed in that temple. And still to this day, the followers of Madhvacarya are worshiping that deity according to the rules and regulations that were established at that time by Madhvacarya. Deity is considered to be Balakrishna. Krishna is a child in Vrindavan. He's holding the butter churning stick and the ropes in his hands, which he stole from his mother. So Madhvacarya was glorifying the Lord in this way. And the deity of Lord Krishna is still worshipped to this day. So Madhvacarya's Brahma Sutra commentary, meanwhile, was well accepted, and he established as his headquarters this Sri Krishna Mutt. And he decided at some point that he was going to go for a second pilgrimage to Badrikashram, which he did. On the way, they arrived at the bank of the Ganga, that's the Ganges, and crossing that bank was illegal because there was a Muslim ruler on one side and a Hindu ruler on the other side, and they didn't get along. So the rule was, anyone tries to cross this bank into the Muslim side, they will be killed. But Madhvacarya didn't mind that. He took his followers by the hand, crossed the river by swimming, and came on the other side, where they were immediately accosted by the king's ministers and soldiers. And Madhvacarya pacified these men who were ready to kill the whole party. And he asked boldly, fearlessly, that I would like to see your king. So somehow or other, his influence was such, his demeanor was such that these men were pacified. Not only that, they took him to see the king. When the king spoke with Madhvacarya, he could see that this person was a genuine saint. And he not only gave Madhvacarya passage through his kingdom, but in fact, he offered half of his kingdom to Madhvacarya because he was so much overwhelmed by the saintliness of Madhva and even his followers. Of course, Madhvacarya, they were not interested, and he declined. But at least he established that they were not spies. In this way, Madhvacarya on several occasions met with gangs of robbers who tried to attack the party, but they were overcome in various ways. One biographical account is that some dacoits or robbers came to see the party moving through the area, and they decided that they were going to rob them. And nowadays in America, we call this carjacking. But Madhvacarya's party Madhva had such mystical influence that these dacoits were watching the party, and they saw that all these men turned into stone boulders, and they were astonished. Then they looked again, and these stone boulders had turned back into men moving. But every time they tried to attack, these men turned into boulders. This is what they saw. So such was Madhva's mystic power that he could do things like that. So Madhva went again to Badrikashram. He got his blessings, Vyasa's blessings for his Mahabharata commentary. He wrote so many things at this time. He stopped in Banaras on the way back from Badrikashram. He preached to so many Mayavad sannyasis there. It must have been a great opportunity for him. He was looking forward to that kind of thing. So Madhvacarya was doing like this. When Madhvacarya came back to Udupi, he found that there was the old establishment, the Shankara establishment, they were very much envious, actually, of Madhva's stunning success. And they thought the best way to get rid of this guy is to steal all of his books, steal all of his writings. So they conspired to do that. But Madhvacarya, with the help of a local king, was able to accost the thieves, and they were imprisoned, and Madhvacarya's library was returned. They say that this was affected by the same Vidyashankar that Madhvacarya had argued with earlier in his career. So these are some of the things that Madhvacarya had done. Madhvacarya has also composed more writings, practically speaking, than any of the other Vaishnava acharyas. Madhvacarya wrote 37 works, and they're all very special. They're all very powerful. They all very decisively defeat the Mayavad philosophy. So Madhvacarya was expounding on Aitreya Upanishad one day in the temple of Ananteshwar, and suddenly there was a shower of flowers from the sky, and the flowers fell upon Madhvacarya, and when everything was visible again, Madhvacarya was not there. Only the flowers remained. That's how he disappeared while preaching from the Aitreya Upanishad. So his philosophical position is called Shuddha Dvaita, and that means pure dualism, but really it's more like a pluralism, because one of the central tenets of his teaching is Pancha Bhed. There are 5 differences. And Madhvacarya's philosophy teaches, this is, well, we can say that there's a famous verse that actually summarizes his teachings. Shriman Madhva Mate Hari Paratara Satyam Jagat Tattvato Bhedo Jivagana Harer Anuchara Nichocha Bhavam Gataha Muktir Naija Sukhanubhuti Ramala Bhaktish Tat Sadhanam Yakshadi Tritayam Pramanam Akhilam Nayayika Vedyo Harihi. That means that Madhva's philosophy is that Hari is supreme. This world is actually real. The jivas are different from both Hari and the world, and they're all subordinate to Lord Hari. There are gradations among them eternally. Liberation is the bliss of self-realization. Pure devotion is the means of gaining that liberation. And the 3 pramanas are perception, deduction, and authoritative testimony. We call that pratyaksha, anumana, and shabda praman, same as we accept. The Vedas teach only of Hari. This is his ultimate conclusion. So we can say a lot about this. There's so many things to explain, but I don't want to take too much time. But as we said, this Pancha Bheda concept is very important. Jiveshwara bhidachaiva jadeshwara bhidathatha. Jiva bhedo mitaschaiva jada jiva bhida tatha. Mitascha jada bhedo yaha prapancho bheda panchakaha. That means the jivas and the Lord are different. The Lord and matter are different. The jivas are different from each other, just as they're different from the Lord and matter. Each one is different from the other. This is the valuable distinction that involves 5-fold difference. This is the cornerstone of Madhva's philosophy. Everything he sees in this way. So these are some of his teachings, only some. We can't really dilate too much. But he says that the jivas are pratibimbas. He doesn't say that they are parts and parcels of God, although they are comprised of Satchidananda. Rather, he says they are reflections of God. That means they're actually different. They're not just qualitatively one. This is not something Madhva will accept. He says, no, they are different, actually. We don't necessarily agree with that, but that's what Madhvacarya taught. And there's an eternal hierarchy among them. Some jivas are better than other jivas eternally. And all of them are dependent, absolutely, on the Supreme, etc., etc. Many people have compared Madhvacarya to St. Thomas Aquinas in the Christian tradition for these reasons, because Madhvacarya also taught that the jiva's relationship with the Supreme Lord is mediated. Mediated by whom? By Vayu. And Madhvacarya is said to have been that very Vayu. So that's something like the Christian theology, that the relationship between the living beings and God is mediated by Jesus Christ. Some people even think that Madhvacarya may have been influenced by Christian ideas, because there were some Christians at that time in Southwest India, just as there still are. That's not something we have time to get into, but it's also not very likely. It's dismissed by most scholars. Okay, so Madhvacarya wrote 37 works. They're very famous. He wrote, main thing that he wrote is his commentary on the Brahma Sutra, but he also wrote commentary on the Rig Veda. He wrote a sub-commentary on his own commentary of Brahma Sutra. He wrote many, many things, 37 works. He wrote, as we said, Bhagavad-Gita commentaries, Mahabharata commentary, Bhagavatam commentary, and many independent works of his own that elaborate his philosophical system. His style is very terse and very almost cryptic in some ways. Usually in the commentaries, when we find Madhvacarya say something, he'll just quote a verse, but the relevance is not explained or elaborated. So it's a little difficult to understand him. Very much of his philosophy has actually been filled in, you can say, by his predecessors, namely Jayatirtha, major commentator, and others to this day. So this is what Madhvacarya was doing. More than any others, Madhvacarya quotes from a wide variety of sources, even if they're sources that nobody knows about now. But according to B.N.K. Sharma, a famous Madhvite scholar, he says that Madhvacarya had at his disposal in those days as many as 21 Brahma Sutra bhashyas. So if he says something that nobody recognizes now, those works have been lost. I know from personal experience with manuscript libraries in India that they usually don't know what they have themselves, and their manuscripts are in disarray. And so it's very easy for things to get lost, which they do. That's something we can say. Okay, so Madhvacarya, this is a brief introduction. We didn't really talk about his deity very much. There's a lot more that we can say. But instead, I'm going to quote from his Dwadasha Stotra, the stotra that he wrote when he was expecting that deity to come. And I'll just end with that. He writes in the second stotram of those 12 series of 12 stotras, I worship thee, worshipable, ever blissful Vasudeva, the stainless Lord of Indira, who is Lakshmi, the dispenser of boons of the benevolent deities, beginning with Brahma, the original being. I bow to the lotus feet of the Lord of Shri, with a pedestal as if touched by the crowns of all the gods, as it were, pacifier of the darkness of the heart, like the effulgence of the sun. The hips of the Lord, bearing golden garments and wearing a belt of tiny gold bells, are resorted to by the mother of the worlds, Lakshmi, and are to be contemplated. The abdomen of the Lord is to be meditated upon. Even though slender, it bears the burden of the entire creation. It is marked with 3 lines, and it is always exclusively embraced by the goddess of fortune, Shri. Appearing as though finite, in between his 2 arms, is the infinite chest of Lord Vishnu. It is the residence of Indira Lakshmi, and is worthy of recollection by those above the darkness of ignorance. The arms of the Lord, Hari, bearing the conch, Sudarshan disc, mace, and lotus flower, are to be contemplated. The only engagement of those supple arms is the protection of the universe. One should constantly think of Lord Hari's throat, the effulgence of the Kaustubha necklace of the Lord of Vaikuntha, shining like the sun, wherefrom all the Vedas are incessantly being manifested. One should remember the worshipable lotus face of the Lord of Shri, which effects the removal of hellish miseries. It possesses the limitless brilliance of thousands of moons. Resplendent with complete happiness, the gentle smile of the Lord of everything, Govinda, is always to be considered the bestower of the position of eternal bliss. I remember the kind, loving glance of Lord Ram, who is replete with bliss, like an ocean of nectar. That is the remover of the pangs of material existence. One should meditate forever on the grateful eye movement of the Lord. It is awaited upon by Brahma and other gods, and bestows positions such as the post of Brahma and others, and liberation. I constantly think of the unlimited Lord Ananta, especially at the time of death. Even Lord Brahma and other devas, although proclaiming them, still could not reach the end of his glories. So that's the second stotram. I'm just going to say one more because it's hard to resist. This is the Kanduka Stuti of Madhvacarya. Small, only 2 verses, glorifying Krishna in particular. And it's amazingly poetic, but it's even more amazing in that Madhvacarya is said to have written this when he was just a child himself. So he says, Ambara Ganga Chambuta Padaha Paratala Vidalita Gurutara Shakataha Kaliyanaga Trailanahanta Sarasijanavadala Vikasita Nayanaha. That means the Lord sucks his own toes, which are the source of the celestial Ganges. And with that toe, he also shatters the formidable cart demon, Shakatasura. His child's play is deadly for the Kaliya serpent, and his eyes resemble the fresh new petals of the lotus flower. Kala Ghanali Kurbarakaya Sharashata Shakalita Rupushata Nivaha Santanamasman Patu Murarihi Satataka Samajava Kagapati Nirataha. They're tongue twisters. His transcendental body resembles a beautiful row of blackish rain clouds. He scatters hundreds of enemies and dispatches hundreds of their arrows. He is always quickly moving about with his carrier, Garuda. May that Lord Murari always protect us. So this is a brief, too brief really, introduction of Madhvacarya, and some of his glory I'm hoping will be evident by what we've said. I'm going to end here, but if anybody has any questions or any comments, we can discuss anything further.
Prabhu, I have a question.
Yes, Sarvabhauma Prabhu.
The Adupi Krishna deity, I think I heard there's some connection to Queen Rukmini.
Yes.
Can you comment on that?
Yeah, that's a long story. The deity that Madhvacarya found was not new, obviously. The deity had been somewhere. Somehow he got into that Chandan block. So it's said that this deity was actually worshipped by Queen Rukmini and others in Dwaraka many, many years before, while Krishna was still on the planet. Because in Dwaraka, they know about Vrindavan Leela, but they can't really enter into it. But they're attracted by it because after all, this is their husband. So they all go to Rohini. She's their source because Rohini was the one who was there. So they were discussing like this, and one day they all decided, these queens and Rohini Devi, that they would try to get Krishna to show them his childhood form from Vrindavan. So they all, in effect, they ganged up on Krishna one day in Dwarka, and they asked him to please, they importuned him to show us this childhood roop. And Krishna said, no, it's not going to work. That's not for you. You're in a different mood. But they were insistent. They really wanted to see. So Krishna finally agreed he would show them for a short time only his childhood roop. He said that if you see this form for too long, you won't want to resume your life here in Dwarka. So he showed them, and immediately he became a 5-year-old boy running around his mother while she's churning yogurt. butter. And he's doing all the mischievous things that he used to do in Gokula. All these ladies were entranced, all of them. And Krishna stole the rod for churning, and he stole the ropes from his mother, and he was holding them and smiling. And at this point, time was up, the bell went off, he froze and became deity form. So the ladies were all astonished that, we want, no, we want you to stay in this, we want to stay in this form forever, that don't become a deity. Krishna said, no, I'm sorry. I told you this is not proper for you. Your rasa here is as queens in Dwarka, but I'm showing you this form, and if you want, you can also worship this deity, no problem. So they were doing that. She had a special garden in one palace, Rukmini Rani, and in that garden there was a small temple built, and the deity was worshipped very happily in Dwarka. Then, of course, when Krishna finished up his pastimes and arranged for Dwarka to be swallowed by the sea, that deity had to go somewhere. So all the things in Dwarka were being wound up in preparation for its devastation. So the queens and so many devotees, they were going back to Hastinapur, and they were taking so many things, all their possessions with them. So they took the deity also. But at some point, the party became attacked by some infidels, some cowherd men, or some just ordinary dacoits, robbers. So even with Arjun there, he was not able to defend them all because it was Leela. The Shakti had been removed. So they decided that they had to do something. So they hid the deity within a pond in Dwarka called Gopitala. You can still go and see that place. And because of being under the water of that pond for a long, long time, the deity became covered in the chandan that was there and the chalk in the ground. So after 5,000 years, you can imagine things change, and somehow this chalk, we don't know how the merchant got it, but he got this big block of Gopi Chandan chalk. And he was using it as ballast in that ship that Madhvacarya saw off the coast of Udupi with no idea that the deity was inside. But Krishna had arranged, because Madhvacarya wanted to worship the deity, and Krishna also wanted to be worshipped by Madhvacarya. So in this way, the deity was there in Dwarka, and then Madhvacarya released the deity, you can say, from his block of Gopi Chandam. And he's being worshipped like that ever since. Udupi Shri Krishna.
Would it be correct to say that Madhvacarya's Ishtadeva was Lord Vishnu rather than Krishna?
Well, that's interesting, because although they're worshiping Krishna, and they certainly love Krishna in the Madhvacarya line, actually the philosophy is a little different than ours. They don't accept that Krishna is the original Supreme Personality of Godhead. They accept that Narayan is the original Supreme Personality of Godhead. Rama and Narasingha and Krishna, as Rupa Goswami describes, these are maybe the main and the most popular incarnations of Lord Vishnu, but they say Lord Vishnu is supreme, the original Lord. So even though they're worshiping Krishna, but they kind of have the vision that he is Narayana. That's their mindset. So it's hard to really consider that Madhvacarya is a Krishna Bhakta in the same sense that we're familiar with. The Gaudiya Vaishnava Sampradaya and other Sampradayas here in Vrindavan, they are very much fixed on Gokula Leela, Vrindavan Leela, and Krishna's childhood pastimes in general, and especially those with the gopis. But outside of Vrindavan, Krishna Bhakti is a little different. And in Southwest India in particular, we find that the influence of Dwarka is very strong. So they see him as Vishnu, and they worship him in that majestic mood, as we heard from his Kanduka Stuti, riding on Garuda, dispatching so many demons, this kind of mood they worship him. It's very different. So even though they're worshiping Krishna, and they are devotees of Krishna also, but their understanding of Krishna's more in the mood of Aishwarya Bhava. Aishwarya Bhava meaning they're conscious of the Lord's majesty and supreme position as Lord Narayana.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. Sorry, let me just. Yeah, I wanted to ask you something. Actually, this came from a Sri Vaishnava. He had a very serious objection to Madhva's philosophy. So I was not sure to what extent this is true, because I really can't believe that Madhva would have said like that. But he mentioned that Madhvacharya said that some souls are eternally condemned to rot in this material nature. And he also said that the soul in the body of the some jivas, like for example, the Upanishad says that the soul is 1 by 10,000, the tip of the hair. But he said that the soul in the body of some animals is actually of a different dimension. Is there any truth to these two statements?
Yes, there definitely is. This is these are the ramifications of what we described already of the Panchapeda system. One of those 5 differences is that the jivas are all different from each other, and eternally so. And Madhvas arranges those differences in a taratamya. Taratamya means a hierarchy. Lakshmi is the highest, and then you get demigods like Brahma, Shiva. Vayu is, of course, in a special position. Human beings, gods, animals, etc., etc. Remember, one of Madhva's core tenets is that this world is real. And so you have to accommodate this variety and the existence of, well, even logically, the existence of a superlative, you can say, it suggests the existence of comparatives as well. So it is true. Madhvacharya says for some jivas, the perfection of their dharma, their eternal constitutional position is to be demons, for example. So you cannot redeem those souls, according to him. What's even more interesting than that is that Baladev Vidyabhushan in his Prameya Ratnavali, you have to remember that Baladev Vidyabhushan was trained as a Madhva in the beginning. He says something very similar to that. So just as we see variety in this world, he says we see variety in the spiritual existence as well. So yes, it's true actually. Not only Madhvacharya, but many acharyas say this as well, that that there is a hierarchy of jivas, and the whole varnashram system is based on that, as everyone knows. But it has universal ramifications beyond just human society. And the thing that makes it most extreme in Madhva's philosophy is that Madhva insists that this world is real. That's really, you know, it kind of like freezes you forever in that particular position that you're in, which is quite discouraging for those of us who are trying to come from a lower position and take to Krishna consciousness. So that's a problem. But it's true, actually. Madhvacharya does say that.
Okay.
He Sattva yogyas, you know, Rajo Yogya and Tomo yogyas. Those are his terminology. So the Tomo yogyas would be the demons. The Rajo yogyas would be those who are in this world basically forever, and Sattva yogas are those who can go up.
So there are some devotees who have raised their hand. Kishori Priya Mataji. Then after that we'll have Prarit. So you want to let me?
Yeah, whoever's ready.
Let me unmute. Okay.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji, Dandavat Pranam, Jai Srila Prabhupada. I was wondering about the purpose of Shastrarth that had occurred in those days. We hear that also in, this philosophical debates among Vaishnavas or even between other, among other practitioners. What is the purpose of that? And does it even happen today? Is there like anything similar that happens today? Because sometimes it can be disruptive. One of the things that you mentioned in passing was that somebody that Madhvacharya had defeated actually went against him, trying to rob him, or even take his life. So what is the purpose of this?
It's a very good question, because in human society, we require, I mean, the only way, Madhvacarya says the only way to understand Hari is through the Vedas. And you have to understand those Vedas in order to get Hari's grace as well. So the position of Shastra is very important. Actually, this is not just unique to Madhva's philosophy. Everyone teaches this, all the Vaishnavacharyas. In fact, even the non-Vaishnavacharyas are also teaching this, the Shastra Yonitvat. It comes straight from Vyasadeva himself in the Brahma Sutra. So the position of Shastrartha, or Shastric debate, is to establish at ground level in this world a particular view of what the Shastra means, because that has very important ramifications. If you don't understand the Shastra, then you may be doing the wrong thing. And how do you understand the Shastra? Except through discussion. And Krishna says, Mat chitta madgata prana bodhayanta parasparam. So that bodhayanta parasparam is Shastrartha. I mean, it almost has a competitive and, sort of a contest, sort of a flavor to it in history. That's true. And it conjures an image of persons like Keshav Kashmiri, for example, who came to argue with Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. These persons also existed who were simply interested in their reputation and becoming known as great scholars and whatnot. I mean, for that matter, this still happens in modern academic setting as well. Things don't really change that much. Motivations, I mean to say, don't really change that much. But the ideal is different. The ideal is that through an objective assessment, according to logical principles, that's called hermeneutics, one should be able to conclude, what does the Shastra actually mean? And it's vitally important to do that, because without the Shastra, we have nothing we say or do has any authority. That is the point of Shastra Yonitvat. This is explained at great length by all commentators on Brahma Sutra. And throughout Srila Prabhupada's purports, we also find this principle is repeated and explained and elaborated and emphasized. So it is very important. It also, as you mentioned, it's a fact that people don't do this anymore. It's often said that we live in a post-truth age. No one is honest enough to do this anymore. People are defeated, but they don't accept defeat. So what can you do? Then it turns to Shastra. Instead of Shastra, you have Shastra. Many faiths are primitive, faiths in this world. I hate to say,
Looks like we lost him there. Maybe his internet there is. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can hear you, Prabhu.
So it looks like we lost him momentarily. Let's see if he can join us back. So this is proof that this world is real.
okay, can you all hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, you back?
Okay,
Prabhu?
I don't know at what point you lost me, what I was saying, but
You were actually speaking about what it doesn't happen anymore.
people are not honest anymore. That's really the problem. I mean, one scholar has recently written an article in which he says that, it is a mistaken conception to assume that the purpose of higher education and, even an academic conference for that matter is a neutral, dispassionate discussion of the meaning or a gaining of knowledge, because quite often that's not the case anymore. People are concerned about agendas, and people are concerned mainly with fulfilling their ambitions, and people have all sorts of base motivations that really kind of prevent this sort of ideal Shastrartha from occurring in modern society. It can occur, but people are not willing. Therefore, it's said in the Bhagavatam that the last leg of religion is truthfulness. When that goes, what have you got to work with? The other three are already finished, already broken. So, somehow or other we have a little truthfulness, and on that basis, honest persons can dispassionately discuss the Shastra according to traditional principles. Traditional principles means Mimamsa principles. Vedanta school, which we represent, is actually called Uttara Mimamsa, the ultimate or later Mimamsa. But Mimamsa, the word itself means very careful analysis and systematic elaboration, and arriving at the truth of the matter by set principles of analysis, which are traditional, and one has to be trained in that.
Okay, we have
Is that okay?
Yes, Prabhuji. Just one thing was, you mentioned the verse Bodhayantas Parasparam. I understood that as more just a discussion of the pastimes of the Lord, not really a debate.
But discussion means Kathayantas Chamam Nityam. Otherwise, it becomes redundant if they're synonymous. The same verse is saying both things. Madchita Madgata Prana Bodhayanta Parasparam Kathayantas Chamam Nityam. Tushanti Charamanti Cha. So what is the difference? Enlightening one another. That means somebody is guru, someone is shishya. You cannot have a lesson unless someone is the teacher and the other person is the student. Otherwise, there's no question of enlightenment. Our whole system of giving classes that Prabhupada established in ISKCON is based on this principle. The speaker sits on a vyasasana. The listeners, they do not just shoot the breeze with him and discuss casually without any commitment. He's an authority. He has to be respected. Vyas asana. This is the point. Otherwise, it's like in Bhagavad-Gita, before Shishyaste ham shadhimam tvam prapannam, that verse, they were talking as friends, and it cannot be conclusive. Only when you introduce the principle of guru can a discussion actually become fruitful, when there's a question of enlightenment. Otherwise, two friends, they can just discuss, and that's Kathayantas Chamam Nityam, okay. But as soon as one is an authority and the other one is a shrotra, then it becomes, then there's a question of bodha. Is that okay?
Thank you, Prabhuji.
So we get Prarit. You can unmute yourself. Yeah.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu, Dandavat Pranam.
Hare Krishna.
Prabhu, you mentioned that Madhvacharya's one of the teachings or philosophy was that Jivatma is not part and parcel of Krishna, but they are shadow. I think that's what the word you used, I believe. Shadow of Krishna.
Pratibimba, reflection.
Reflection, thank you. Reflection. So, and we know that previous teachings of our acharyas like Shankaracharya or in the past are dependent on time, place, and circumstances also. So was there any specific reason behind Madhvacharya's teaching like that, which probably Mahaprabhu doesn't agree with?
That's a good question. I can't speak with authority to that question. I can share with you the views of one scholar, B.N.K. Sharma, who feels that Madhva was particularly enthusiastic about trouncing Mayavad philosophy by any means whatsoever. Whether that means that he's inventing out of whole cloth ideas that are not actually there in Vaishnava tradition and scripture, that's not a place that I would want to go into. But I don't see any reason to assume that Madhvacarya didn't actually mean everything that he said about his teachings. He seemed to be very confident and seemed to be very forceful and quite convinced about the things that he was asserting. That's part of his tremendous appeal. He was very decisive and very clear.
Yeah. Okay. Any, you have any, so let me, I had a question. So we understand the teachings of Bhaktivinoda Thakur that Mahaprabhu took two ideals from every one of these sampradaya and kind of conglomerated all into our Siddhanta. So I can't really recall what are the two essential elements he took from Madhva's teachings.
Yeah, that would be in the Navadvita Mahatmyam, is it?
Yeah. Was it a deity, the worship of a deity? And
yeah, this escapes me at the moment, but that makes sense because that's essentially what Chaitanya Mahaprabhu told the Tattvavadis in the passage from the Chaitanya Charitamrita that I mentioned already. He said, what I see as valuable in your sampradaya is that you accept the form of the Lord as being real. So that's
one of them.
That sounds good to me. You would have to look it up.
Yeah.
To corroborate.
Okay. I think it's kind of getting late. Anybody has any final questions?
I had a question. Like that Vidya Shankar was the Shankaracharya of Sringeri Math. And there's some connection of Lord Chaitanya to the Sringeri Math. And in Hari Sori's, one of his diary books, he mentioned that when there was a court case against ISKCON, devotees were trying to get endorsements from religious institutions in India for ISKCON. And the Shankaracharya of Sringeri Math gave a positive, endorsement for ISKCON, whereas the Shankaracharya in the Puri, Jagannath Puri, refused to honor ISKCON in the same way. So I just wondered if there's any tradition of appreciation for Madhvacarya from his preaching to Vidya Shankar.
If there's any what?
Any appreciation for Madhvacarya in the Shankar tradition, because the
from Sringeri.
Yeah, the Sringeri Shankaracharya endorsed ISKCON when there was that court case, whereas other Shankaracharyas didn't. So I heard that Lord Chaitanya had extensive talks with Vidya Shankar, and I was just wondering if there's any appreciation for him from that.
Okay, well, I mean, appreciation is kind of vague. Of course, all these respected acharyas, they will of course be civil and show due respect to a person whose authority they cannot deny. And Madhvacarya certainly falls into that category. So does Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, so does Srila Prabhupada, etc. Obviously, at the same time, there are serious ideological differences, and so their praise or their endorsement is going to be qualified. It's going to be somewhat guarded, but I mean, a civil person in general is going to be polite and offer due praise, to give the devil his due, as they say. I don't know what else to say in answer to your question. I'm not really sure what you're probing for.
Thank you.
Okay. We have Mataji, Nimai Sundari Mataji, you want to speak?
Sure. So forgive me if I'm not saying the right thing, but in the discussion of the question, Katyantascha Bodhayantascha, Prabhuji described the position of as Vyasasan somebody in authority position and the listener, the audience, that's the way it goes. My clarification is for that is true. But when two devotees, not one on Vyasana and one on the listening, I mean, just without casual talking and discussing about Sri Krishna or his Leelas, wouldn't it be equally good when one devotee says something, the other, because has a faith, the saying devotee, wouldn't that be Katyantascha? And would not that be beneficial to both of them?
You know what? Your signal
Because-
is kind of unclear to me, so I'm not hearing a lot of what you're saying.
Okay, let me
Maybe-
try again.
Yeah, simply just.
Okay. I was born in a Punjabi family, had some influence of Guru Nanak Dev's Granth Sahib. There is a popular saying, "Ek ne kahi, dusre ne mani, Nanak kahe dono gyani." Whether it's in a family life or wherever, satsangi, getting together, if one suggests something and the other one thinks and accepts it, which means they are both jnani. Whenever there is acceptance between the devotees, they are both jnani instead of discussing and debating and cutting the points. So I feel that influence in my experience all my life. Whoever you're listening to, if you listen with full heart and full conviction that God is speaking through this person right to me, and you accept that, that is the great thing. Am I wrong?
Certainly one has to be open-minded. The Jains have a very interesting philosophical principle called Syadvad. That means that they're in their discussion of philosophy with anyone else, even members of other religions, they're kind of willing to give some benefit of the doubt. Syat is a Sanskrit verb that means it might be so. So, you know, it's in other words, a person should have an open mind. I think that's the point you're making, and it's certainly valid.
Thank you, because I feel that personally all the time. And sometimes I'm labeled as, oh, you accept everything because you're a devotee. What other way? That is the only way I know. Whatever is said to me. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, that's also an important thing to consider. That to be everyone's disciple is to be no one's disciple, it is said. So at some point we have to introduce some discrimination. You know from Srila Prabhupada's books that discrimination is the key characteristic of Madhyama Adhikar. And to really make advancement in devotional service, one has to come to the Madhyama Adhikar platform. And on Kanishta Adhikar platform, we can't really distinguish who's a devotee and who's not a devotee. But on the Madhyama Adhikari platform, we can. And the reason we can is because we've introduced Shastric discrimination on the basis of clear principles. Guru Sadhu Shastra, Vakya Chitete Koryaikya. For example, this is Narottam Das Thakur says. A person or a discussion should go on the basis of what the Shastra says, and that Shastra has to be illustrated by the entire Guru Parampara tradition behind our own spiritual master, who can directly answer any questions and clarify situations as they apply to our own life. So that kind of discrimination is absolutely necessary. At the same time, it's not that everything everyone says is valid, though there will always be some validity in what anyone says. I mean to say this, you can always learn something from anybody, just anybody. You can always learn something, but you cannot learn everything from just anybody. You have to be discriminate. And that's the purpose of Shastrartha, and Srila Prabhupada's books also, they make this very clear, I think. So that they both have to be there. You have to listen with an open mind because you never know who you're talking to. What is that doha? It says, Tulasi is a sansara mein sabse milya bhai, na jane kis roop mein narai mil jaye. You don't know who you're dealing with. Anybody can be.
Yes.
You understand?
Yes, very
So-
much.
Yeah. So, but you have to apply this very carefully because otherwise you can just be misled by listening to anybody.
True.
There are evil people in this world. That's the point.
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
All right, so I think it's getting late out here. It's 8:30 p.m. So thank you, Mukunda Datta Prabhu, for this wonderful presentation.
Thank you all very much, and thanks to the Prabhupada.
Jai, thank you all. So there is actually a compilation of the lives of the great acharyas by Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur's writings. So you all can find out about Madhvacarya's life, even Shankaracharya's life is here. Shankaracharya, no, probably Shankaracharya's life is not here. Nimbarka Acharya, Vishnu Swami, Ramanujacharya, like this. So this is a good source of information. You can see many of the things Mukunda Datta Prabhu spoke about today in this book. So thank you all very much. Once again, Mukunda Datta Prabhu, for delivering this wonderful discourse. Jai. So we'll end the session now. So Vancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhyeva Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo
Vaishnave Bhayo Namo Namaha.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.